In 1916, the British strategy of ruling India by dividing its people hit a massive roadblock. The Lucknow Pact halted that machinery. This agreement forged an unlikely alliance between two historically opposed political bodies, the Indian National Congress and the All India Muslim League. Freshly released from prison, veteran Congress leader Bal Gangadhar Tilak made this unity his primary mission, pushing both moderate and extremist factions to collaborate. On the other side, Muhammad Ali Jinnah held membership in both the Congress and the League. He orchestrated the negotiations so effectively that Sarojini Naidu named him the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. Yet this exact treaty, widely celebrated as the pinnacle of cross-communal solidarity, contained the structural blueprint for India's eventual partition. To grasp the true weight of the Lucknow Pact, we have to look closely at its dual nature. It forced immediate, sweeping concessions from the British Empire, but it achieved that by formalizing the very religious divides that would eventually tear the subcontinent apart. This was a deeply complex legal compromise. The unintended consequences of these specific political trades would permanently reshape the map of South Asia. Before 1911, the Muslim League operated largely as a conservative organization, traditionally aligning its goals with British administration. That stance shifted drastically in response to international crises. The 1911 Italo-Turkish War and the Balkan Wars placed the British Empire in direct opposition to the Ottoman Empire. Britain refused to assist Turkey, alienating Indian Muslims who watched the empire abandon their religious counterparts. This tension was visible. Indian Muslim soldiers served the British military, marching under Islamic symbols, while the empire actively worked against their global interests. At home, the empire delivered another blow. In 1911, the British government abruptly annulled the partition of Bengal. Many Muslims had heavily supported the initial division of the province. They had organized massive public gatherings to show their backing, only to see the British reverse the policy under pressure. Furthermore, the British refused to grant a proposed university in Aligarh the power to affiliate colleges across India, frustrating the Muslim intelligentsia. When World War I broke out, the colonial administration heavily repressed the growing Muslim nationalist press, forcibly shutting down Maulana Azad's newspaper Al-Hilal and Muhammad Ali's Comrade. Prominent figures, including the Ali brothers, were interned. This aggressive censorship pushed younger, more militant nationalists within the League to the forefront. A decade of compounded international slights and domestic betrayals transformed the Muslim League into a fiercely anti-imperialist force. This new ideological hostility toward the British created the common ground required to ally with the Congress. By late 1916, representatives from both the Congress and the League met in Bombay and Calcutta. They recognized that presenting a united front meant making severe ideological concessions. To secure the League's partnership, the Congress conceded its most fiercely held principle by formally accepting the demand for separate electorates. Under a separate electorate, the voter base is entirely segregated by religion. Muslim voters would exclusively elect their own Muslim representatives to the legislative councils, cutting them out of the general voting pool. This was a total reversal. When the British initially introduced this exact system in the 1909 Indian Councils Act, the Congress had fought it aggressively, arguing it would fracture the nationalist movement. In the Lucknow Pact, however, they agreed to apply this segregated voting system to both the imperial and provincial legislative councils. The agreement also established a second major provision, proportional representation. Muslims were granted a guaranteed fixed number of legislative seats based strictly on the Muslim population density within each respective province. These two mechanisms cemented a system where political representation in India would now be mathematically calculated along religious lines. The Congress traded a foundational, secular democratic principle. In return, they gained the immediate, tactical leverage of an unbroken political alliance against the British. With internal compromises settled, the unified front went on the offensive. In October 1916, elected representatives approached the Viceroy with a rigorous memorandum. These joint constitutional demands aimed at seizing control over Indian affairs, moving past the era of fragmented nationalistic petitions. First, the British government had to explicitly declare its intention to grant self-governance to India at an early date. Second, both central and provincial legislative assemblies had to be massively expanded, with a strict requirement that democratically elected members hold the absolute majority. Third, these councils required a guaranteed 5-year tenure, removing the British administration's ability to arbitrarily dissolve hostile legislatures. The fourth demand attacked the colonial economic structure, specifically targeting the salary of the Secretary of State for India. The pact insisted this salary must be paid exclusively by the British government. It was a direct maneuver to stop the drain of Indian tax funds to London. The fifth and final core demand focused on executive power sharing at the very top of the colonial hierarchy. It mandated that Indians must comprise at least 50% of the members in both the Viceroy's Executive Council and the provincial governors' councils. This comprehensive 5-point blueprint was a massive escalation from the past. It offered a complete legal framework for an Indian-run government. By delivering a legally rigorous and totally unified document, the Congress and the League cornered the administration. The standard British tactic of pitting Hindus and Muslims against each other to stall reforms was rendered useless. The immediate, short-term impact of this unified pressure was undeniable. The combined political weight of the Hindu-Muslim alliance ended the legislative impasse in London. It forced a major concession. In August 1917, the government issued the Montague Declaration. This document explicitly promised increased Indian participation in every branch of administration and the gradual development of self-governing institutions. It directly paved the way for the Government of India Act of 1919. In the context of colonial rule, extracting a written promise of self-governance was an unprecedented tactical victory for the Indian nationalist movement. Jinnah and Tilak's gamble paid off. They leveraged cross-communal unity to pry sweeping constitutional reforms from the grip of the empire. However, this alliance was exceptionally fragile, and its long-term legacy carries a dark shadow. The long-term impact of the pact is rooted in that core compromise, the formal constitutional acceptance of separate electorates. By codifying segregated voting blocks into their own joint demands, the Congress implicitly agreed with the premise that Hindus and Muslims were distinct political entities with entirely separate interests. This framework permanently institutionalized communal divisions straight into the legal machinery of Indian governance. It guaranteed that politicians would appeal to religious identity rather than national unity to win elections. Over the next 3 decades, that institutionalized divide strained relations beyond repair, fueling the rhetoric that culminated in the demand for a separate Muslim state. The Lucknow Pact successfully leveraged tactical unity to win vital self-governance reforms, but it tragically embedded the very constitutional wedge that would eventually fracture the subcontinent.